This video is going to be a lot more colorful than you're used to. Watch out, neutral tones, there's no place for you here. Welcome back to Bentley House Minis. Today is going to be part 2 of creating a mouse house. In part 1, which I will link in the description box below, I created a wall cavity that in this video I'm going to fill with a bunch of things, and I'm going to be working on the little mouse dolls that I unboxed in the previous video. I'm actually going to work on the mice first. I'm going to be sewing their clothing and painting their faces, and then I'm just going to take a bunch of stuff and try to make them a home. I'll make sure to put timestamps since they're 2 different activities so you can find what you're looking for. So without further ado, let's get started. This is my husband's grandmother's machine that is now my machine. And this is the owner's manual. On button. Before I began sewing, I had to find my fabrics. Maya had mentioned that using old worn clothing was the easiest way to get a stretchy and movable fabric for these dolls that move around quite a bit. Some of these were in our donation pile, and some of them had holes in the knees, so they weren't even really good for donation. I don't really want the outfits to match because they're supposed to be made out of scraps of clothing, but I did divide them up into the different colors I thought I would use for each doll. If you want to know more about these dolls, you can check out my last video, part 1, which I will link in the description, and also the Mysfit Dolls website. The link will be down there for the website too. To begin construction on the pants, I just traced around the doll's legs, trying to give myself enough room to add the stitching. What I found is that it was just a little bit too tight for my doll, and I was having a really hard time getting this stretchy fabric underneath the sewing foot so that I could sew close to where it needed to be. So this time I left the fabric all in one rectangle and then just went around the edge. Also, I got one pair of pants done and the bobbin emptied, which is my worst nightmare. However, after only about an hour and a half worth of research, I figured out how to fix it. Please note, you're not going to get any great sewing tips from me. I just kind of make it up as I go. I found it so much easier to leave the pants in a rectangle and then cut out the shape afterward. This made it so much easier to work on something as small as this little pair of pants. Once I got them back onto the mouse, they fit really great. They were a little bit big at the top, but that made me have this idea to do overalls, which I'm really excited about trying. I also decided to roll up the pant legs, and of course I had to test the movement of the doll to make sure that she could still move in the pants. After all, that's the whole point of having a doll that is made like this. I followed a very similar process for making the shirt. I used the edge of the clothing as the top of the arm sleeves, and then just sewed around the edges that I wanted to be closed and then cut it out afterwards. I also decided to go ahead and cut up the back of the shirt, and because this is the type of fabric that it is, it's really stretchy and I made sure it doesn't fray, I could just cut out the area where the neck is going to go through, and I don't have to worry about a bunch of little strips of fabric that are coming off. It'll just stay like that, and I think it adds to the scrappiness of the outfit, so it does look like it was just kind of put together by a mouse with whatever she had access to. Even though I'm not permanently gluing the clothes on my doll, like the dolls I did in my Beetle Gust project, I am going to semi-permanently attach them by sewing them into the clothes. The nice thing is that if one day I do want to change their clothing or do something a little bit different, I just have to snip through the thread and remove the clothing. To create the bib of the overalls, I just cut out another piece of this stretchy jean fabric that used to belong to one of my kids, and I put glue on the back, and this is going to keep any threads that I put through from pulling through. I did use the sewing machine to attach the bib to the pants, but then I used some more of this thread to make it look like it was hand stitched by the mouse. I also used kind of a corset type tie on the back of the pants. This is going to keep them on my mouse and give them a little bit more of a shape. And I can use some more of that embroidery thread to make straps that are going to help hold up the overalls. I'm just going to tie a knot at one end, pull it through, and then sew it to the back of the pants. And this again is going to help hold the pants up and keep it on my mouse. This is how it is looking so far. I'm really happy. I know it kind of looks messy, but at the same time, I think it looks very handmade, and I do want this mouse to have a sewing area and kind of show that she did make this herself, for herself. I'm following the same steps for the brown mouse's pants, and I'm using some different color thread and some different color fabric. I do want him to look different, but in the end, I do also want them to look like they come from the same universe. I am going to be giving him more of a coat type jacket. I wanted to make it a little bit longer, and I really like how it came out. I know I'm not giving a lot of detail on how I'm making these clothing, but honestly it was as simple as tracing around the figure and then sewing some simple lines, knowing that the sides would come together, and then trying it on to see if it fit. I did have to remake a couple things, but I'm not going to bore you with that process. So in order to make my two mice look like they go together, I'm going to give each other a strap of fabric for their belt that is made out of the other one's fabric. So hopefully that makes them seem like they're a pair that goes together. So I'm using a bit of that green to make a utility belt for my gray mouse. She's got a paper clip and a bobby pin hanging off of the side. I see her more as a creator or inventor. And then the brown mouse, he is going to have a little decorative toothpick that serves as his sword. I feel like he's more adventurous, maybe going out and getting supplies for the gray mouse to work with. So for his belt, I just sewed on the toothpick and then added a little bit of glue to make sure it stayed on. And both of the belts are just tied on, so I can easily take them off if I want to change something out. I decided to use a little bit of watered down black acrylic paint to age the threads in the clothing. I felt like they were just a little bit too bright and new, especially for having to be found thread that is used in clothing that's probably going to be used until it's completely wore out. So now is the part of this project I have never done before. I have made clothes, but I have never made eyes like this. So I'm following the steps that were laid out by Maya that come in the kit. And the first step, I'm trying to find the eyeballs, which are held in place by sticky tack on the inside of the head cavity. They're two different sizes because they're two different size dolls. I'm going to be using acrylic paint to paint the eyes, and the sticky tack worked really well to hold it down. I got my museum wax out to hold them down, but I was like, oh, it came with sticky tack, and so I just went with that. I'm going to be doing mostly green eyes for the brown mouse, and then I'm going to do brown eyes for the gray mouse. However, I am swirling them with a little bit of the other color so that they look more like a natural eye color. Once that's dry, I can use some black paint, and I'm just going to do a little dot on the inside to look like the center of the eye. The instructions suggested UV resin for this next step, but I didn't have any, so I'm going to be using diamond glaze. I found this product because of Queen City Minis, who highly suggest dimensional magic, and this is a similar product, so thank you Queen City Minis for that suggestion. I'll put a link to a video of her using dimensional magic if you want to learn more about that. Basically, I just filled up the cavities of the eyes and let that dry, and then I used the glaze over the entire eye piece to make sure that it is shiny. Once I started putting the eyes back into the head, I could see just how much personality this brings to the dolls. It was really easy, well, I'll say, okay, it wasn't easy to get them straight, but they were easy to put into the head. But then I realized I probably need to do the face up before I put the eyes in, and I probably should have done all of this before I did the clothing, but I just kind of do whatever part of the project I feel like doing at the time. I'm going to be painting them pretty simply, I think. There is a lot of interesting detail in the sculpt of this 3D print, so it really wasn't hard. I just put paint wherever I thought it needed to go. One of the hardest things about painting miniature doll faces is the eyes, so it was really fun to do this knowing that the eyes were already done, and once they were placed inside the head, they were going to look amazing, and I could just really play around with using chalk pastels to give them little blush marks or painting their ears, and so it took a lot of stress off knowing that I did not have to paint the eyes by hand onto the face. The chalk pastel worked really well on the resin print. Of course, when you use chalk pastel, you do have to seal it, and so I highly suggest Mr. Super Clear. However, I did not have access to Mr. Super Clear that day, so I used this UV resistant clear by Krylon, and it worked really well too. Here's how they are looking at the moment with their face done and their eyes inserted. There are some things I would do differently now, but this was definitely a learning process and a different type of doll than I have ever painted before. I could not picture what I wanted their hair to look like, and I think I burned myself out on hairdos doing the Beetlejuice dolls, so instead I've decided to make them headpieces that are going to cover up the line that is where their skull cap attaches to their head. So I'm using a piece of elastic and some very, very small buttons to create a headband for the gray mouse, and because the elastic was so bright white, I decided to age it with a little bit of watered down paint. Once I had it all sewn together, this is how it was looking. And she looks really mad right now, so let's get her headband on. Maybe she'll look a little less upset at me. I have noticed that with these dolls, the way that they move, they do kind of change the way their expression looks depending on how you're looking at them, and oftentimes the eyes kind of look like they're following you as well. So it's fun to play around with. For the brown mouse, I decided to give him a headpiece as well. However, I'm keeping it a little bit more simple and just using a scrap of that same green material. I'm wrapping it around his head once and then once around his ear and tying it at the back. It covers up the head cap gap, I guess you would call it, the head cap gap, pretty well and stays on really easily. I am so happy with how they came out, but of course, before I can call this done, I need to paint their toenails. Now that the mice are finished, I'm ready to work on the mouse house or the wall cavity that I created in the last video. I have my box of craft supplies that I also opened in the last video, and I have this box. This is a box full of some of my childhood things. It was really fun because this past week, a friend from my childhood, actually my teenage years, one of my best friends, came to visit me, and we got to go through this together, and there were so many memories that we both had with some of these items. She also helped me go around my studio and find some other things to throw in here, so not everything's from my childhood. Some things I have accumulated over the years, but there's a lot of really good stuff in here, and I'm excited to put it together. We also played around with a few of the things, so I already have some layouts pre-planned, thanks to Jen. Thanks, Jen. So I'm gonna move to a top-down camera so you can actually see the things, and we'll get started. You weren't in the last video. I got in so much trouble. I know. She's here. She's still in charge. She's really more the director of everything. She likes to be more behind the camera, but every now and then she'll come say hi. If you watched my last video, you'll know that this box of supplies was sent in by some very kind viewers who had some extra crafty stuff they didn't need anymore. So I'm going to be pulling out multiple things. Well, this was from dinner last night, but I'm going to be pulling out multiple things that I think will work in this project and then using them along with some of my childhood things and other found objects to create this scene. This was so fun to go through someone else's supplies. I felt very much like a borrower or the mice themselves trying to find things that would work in their home. This is the box that I told you was full of some of my childhood things. Some of these things are also stuff that I've collected, such as this mask that had belonged to my child. I saw several comments saying a mask would make a great hammock, so we are going to try that out in this project. There are also multiple things in this box that we are not going to be using in this project. One of them was straight down memory lane. I used to play the bassoon when I was in high school and a little bit in college, and these are bassoon reeds, and we would store them in an Altoid tin, which was covered with paper towels to keep them safe with holes so that they didn't grow mold. So that was my little bassoon reed collection. Also, pay attention to this watch that I'm holding right now and notice how the glass is not broken and how it has not been broken for most of the time I've had it. So just wait for that. I also have a few loose bassoon reeds, so I am going to try and use one in the project. And of course I need to find a place for this lone chess piece. So I'm just going to start grabbing things and let's get started on this wall cavity for the mice. I knew I didn't want to do too much when it came to covering up the wall cavity itself because I still want it to very much look like the inside of the wall. If I cover it up too much, you won't be able to tell what it is. So I'm going to be using this very large piece of paper. I'm actually wondering if it's like wallpaper border, and I'm also going to be using this large sticker to make a decorative area in the corner of the wall cavity. At first I didn't quite know where I was going to put this sticker, but I really loved the design and I thought it would bring a lot of color to the inside. Eventually I decided to cut it in half, which gave me a lot more options because it made the sticker half the size. And I thought it would make a really cool backdrop for this breakfast area I was thinking was going to go down in this corner. To begin, I'm adding some glue, and I realized as I was putting these in, these pieces were looking too brand new and nice. So earlier you saw me ripping the edges of the wallpaper. I'm also going to be pulling at the edges of the sticker so that it doesn't look so perfect. And then also I can take a bit of sandpaper and run it across the front image on the sticker and the wallpaper. This is going to dull the image, and then also it picked up the lines of the plaster that I had previously pushed through onto the inside of the wall cavity, and I thought that was a nice detail, making it look like it had been worn over the years. This tube was also in the box of craft supplies, so I'm going to be painting it with a metallic paint to make it look like an actual tube inside of the wall. I'm also going to use this as a way to get some fairy lights into the project. I knew I wanted some wires poking out the bottom of this tube, and so I thought the idea of the mice kind of tapping into the wires and having their own lighting coming out of this tube was interesting. So I'm adding the fairy lights, and I'm going to be gluing the light pack on the outside and gluing the tube on the inside. It does kind of cut off at the top of the project, but the project cuts off there, so I didn't like that too much, but I just kind of went with it. These wires also came in the package of all the craft supplies, and I just picked out a few of the colors that I liked. I'm going to twist them together. They don't have to run completely through the tube, so I'm just gluing them at the end. Before gluing the tube into the project, I decided to add beads to the back of it. This is going to help it stand out from the background, and because I plan to make some kind of ladder structure there, I know it'll give me a little bit more wiggle room on hiding things behind the tube. Here's the battery box for the fairy lights. I'm making sure to glue it down so that the screws are on the outside, so if I need to change the battery later, I can. I'm using hot glue to glue down the wires, and then I'm just going to make the wires go down and then outside of the project. I'm also gluing in one that's kind of frayed, because as we know, mice like to chew on wires. Here you can see I tried to use ties to make it look like they were being twisted together, and later on I'll cover up the ends so you can't see where the wires actually go. I had some leftover pieces that were the back pieces to the wall cavity, and I thought I could use these to make some shelving. I glued the pieces back to back so both sides look like they have a rough wood finish, and then I cut them unevenly into triangle shapes so that they'll fit in the corner of the box. So this was easy to create two very fast shelves. I'm using this same material to create a platform that's going to hang in the center of the wall cavity. I do need an extra little place where the mice can kind of rest as they're climbing up towards the top. Here you can see the shelves in one corner. This is going to be their trophy area where they keep all of their little things they find when they go on adventures. And I'm using parts of the popsicle sticks to create triangles. I want these to kind of look haphazard, but also they are functional because they will be helping my project and the shelves stay put for longer and not break, hopefully, in the future. This is where the platform is going to go, and I'm thinking of the shelves as also a staircase, a very rickety staircase, where the mice can climb from the lower part up onto the center platform. I'm using another popsicle stick in the center, and I'm not doing anything to the popsicle sticks. I want them to look like popsicle sticks. I know we use them a lot in miniatures, but we usually try to, make them look a little bit nicer. I'm not doing anything to change what they look like. I'm adding a bit of string through the front of the platform, which is going to double as an actual support to keep the platform from collapsing, and I think it also helps this whole thing continue to look handmade with just scraps of whatever the mice could find. Once I was happy with how everything looked, I could go ahead and glue in the platform. It's going to sit just on top of that popsicle stick that I glued in the back. The string easily went up and over that broken board I had already put in, and then I tied it around the nail that was sticking out that I put in the last video. I'm just really trying to use what I already have to make it look like the mice moved in and made the best of what they could. I had this chopstick, and I think this is going to be the other side of my ladder, so I decided to go ahead and glue it in, and this way I could test how the bed was going to work. Using this smaller mask was perfect. I think an adult size mask would have been way too big. I also had to glue the back part of the mask to the back of the room to hold it up. I decided to put up this lovely cardboard backdrop for you because behind this is my window in my studio, and I was really just trying to figure out how to work on this really tall project so you could see everything. Here's that watch again. I don't know how long it's been around, but one round with me, I dropped it on the ground and now it's broken. So I am going to be using the diamond glaze again, and I'm just going to run it along the edge. This is hopefully to keep any glass from falling off and protect any little fingers that might go in there so that they don't get cut. This is going to be their little clock for the eating area. I'm using the doily as a little rug, and I found this thread spool that belonged to my husband's grandmother. I've had this piece of flat rock for I don't know how long, and I don't know where I got it, which will work as my tabletop. I have this little salt shaker that doesn't have a pepper match, so that can go in there. And then I had this shell for a long time that has like a little hook in it. I'm not quite sure where it originally was supposed to go. I decided to use this chess piece as a chandelier, so it's going to sit upside down on the bottom part of the platform, and then I can use the fairy lights to wrap around the chess piece, making sure that some of the fairy lights end up at the end of the little chandelier arms. I can then wrap the fairy lights around the chopstick that I previously glued in so that I can get the lights a little higher up in the room. I put the very end through this bead that was also in the crafting box that I was sent, and then had 4 little lights showing out of there, and I'm going to glue that up underneath the broken plank so that the bed area has some nice lighting. Back to the breakfast nook or eating nook area, I wanted to use some actual birthday candles on the table. I stuck them in place with some hot glue, and then I was hoping the wax would kind of come down the candle as it melted and sit on top of the table. That actually didn't really happen. Also, I'm going to be eating my lunch while I watch this. I'm not just going to let it sit there and go down, which I'm glad I did, because at this point, one candle set the other one on fire, which I probably should have known about. And then the flame got really big and I pulled it out of my project, which I probably should have done in the first place. So if you do try something like this, make sure you don't do this inside of your project. But those flames got huge. Here's how the candles looked once they had burnt down a little bit, and I was ready to move on to something else. I'm going to be using museum wax quite a bit in this project because, well, I've never used it before. This is a brand new bottle, but I've been suggested it many times. It is just like a little wax putty material that you put on the back of miniatures and then they hold in place. They use this a lot in museums, which is why it's called museum wax. That way you don't have to permanently put glue on anything. It works pretty well. I'm going to be using these makeup sponges that came in the craft box, put them underneath the lower level. I figure they can be like extra seating or a comfortable place to be if they have any mouse friends come to visit. The rest of this is going through some of my childhood things and finding things that I find interesting, like those fish beads that were really popular when I was a teen, and finding a place for everything on the trophy shelf. I also found in the box several of these pins. I had a lot of random pins. One of them is from NHS when I was in high school, and just all sorts of things. And I thought it would be funny if these mice collected pins and just kind of stuck them into the wall next to their trophy shelf. One of them was when I was on a swim team called the Dolphins. I played tennis, which is where I think Wile E. Coyote came from. Next, I'm going to start working on the center platform, which in my mind I thought would be a great place to have the sewing station. And I'm adding a little bit of a measuring tape, and these are some of the fabrics I used to create their clothes that I rolled up and put embroidery thread around. I can totally see them cutting up scraps and keeping them for the future. I put just a few rolls of fabric on the very top corner shelf, and then the rest of the fabrics going onto the platform. I also wound some embroidery thread around a toothpick, and I'm going to use a bead on either end so that I can mount it to the wall. I also had this little strawberry thing that fell off of the tomato thing that you usually put your pin cushion stuff in, so I thought it'd be perfect for the little mouse to put some of her pins in. Moving on from the sewing area, I can start to build the ladder. I'm going to use different long cylindrical things to create the ladder rungs, and this is the place I could use the bassoon reed. So I have a pin cap, a long bead, a bassoon reed, a pencil, and a barbecue skewer stick, all next to the chopstick. At this time, I also had the idea to use the bendy part of some straws to make my chandelier look a little bit more chandelier-like, and these don't even have to be glued on. I could just put them onto the wire and bend them in place, and I like this so much better than the original. To make the hammock look a little bit more comfortable, I put in some creepy cloth, which I always seem to have around, and I added some glue so that it wouldn't go out of place. You can also see I added a little corner shelf up there by the bed. These colorful petals were in the craft supply box that were sent to me, and I'm going to be using these as kind of cushions because I thought it was a good nod to the fact that a lot of mice use natural things in their bedding. And who hasn't had one of these little tiny bears that they got somewhere for something? It's finally cold enough where I can just wear a poncho all day long, which is basically secretly just wearing a blanket all day. I'm so happy. This is probably my final day working on this mouse project. I've gotten pretty far. However, I have a few observations. I did not expect this project to be as mentally taxing as it has been. I really thought it would be on the easier side because I'm using pre-made items. I didn't really have to make that many miniatures. I already had pre-made this casing in a previous video, so I thought I'd just be kind of putting things in place and it wouldn't be that hard. But I have had to make so many decisions. There's a balance between making it look whimsical, but at the same time organized. Making all these different items that come from different places look like they belong together in a similar scene. Putting together a story of two lives that are lived in this space and trying to think through how they would organize some of these items and what they would even use them for. So even though the usual energy that I would use making miniatures really hasn't been there because I didn't have to make most of these items, it has been a lot of mental work, which has been rather tiring and taken me a lot of time. Because of that, I definitely have a new respect for people that use found items in art. I already had respect for them, but a new understanding, I guess I would say, of how much it takes to really have all of those items work together and make sense as one cohesive project. It's not easy. I'm pretty happy with how everything is looking so far. I just have to finish up kind of these upper areas, maybe put a few more things on the wall, and then it should be done. I honestly don't know much about the relationship between my two mice, but I did find this earring that says best friends that a friend had given me, and so I hung it on the side of the hammock. Whatever the relationship status, we do know that they are best friends. I decided to make the top of the wall cavity kind of the entrance into the mouse area, so it does stay a little bit more plain because I don't want all of their things to be seen by anyone looking in from the top. However, they did need some kind of guardrail as they were coming in from their adventures, so I added some toothpicks, a nail, and a little bit of thread holding all the pieces together to look like a railing they could hold on to as they came back. I also wanted to add on one side of this room some storage for all their supplies and found items. In order to create this storage space, I'm using all sorts of screws and nails and pins. I thought it would be fun to screw one of the screws in from the outside of the project. This was pretty easy because this is that pink foam stuff, and it actually went through the foam easier than nails do. I put in one short screw and then I put a longer one in towards the top, and I have a very specific idea in mind for that one. And then I added the nails and pins in random places and started putting on their supplies. So I have some safety pins, some rubber bands, and all sorts of things that I think would be helpful, maybe that they could make tools or contraptions out of. Now, it wouldn't be a complete project without some sort of a piece of sock. I actually have this part of a sock for some reason. Not sure what I used it for, but I used a binder clip to fold it and kind of use it as a bag on this side that's going to hold the toothpicks and Q-tips that they collected that are kind of hard to hang on the wall. I also felt like they would pick up any sort of jewelry that they could use as a chain, so I found this chain that I wasn't using and added that onto a nail on the wall. I also found an old key. This is probably a key to a house I used to live in a long time ago. Who knows why I still have it, but thankfully it can be in my project. In my collection of things, I also found this really small pulley, which I thought would be fantastic for the mice being able to lower heavy things into the bottom part of their wall cavity. So I put that on that upper screw, the longer one, and then I found this little keychain type hook that I thought would be good on the end. I made sure to wrap the string up and tie it to one of the back screws so that now their little pulley system is kind of up towards the top and out of the way. I have a few more things to add, and I'm going to do that off camera and then show you the final results, which is what you're looking at now. Of course, this whole room will not be complete unless the mice are put into some places so you can see how they would interact with this room. I was afraid that it was going to be a little bit too small or cramped, but once they're inside, it does look like an area that they actually could have a cozy life inside of. I couldn't resist adding in my Aira portrait doll into the room hanging out with the mice, and the cushions did work out pretty well. It was pretty comfy. And I did want to show you that I was successful at getting it to hang on the wall. I want to say thank you again to Maya at Mysfit Dolls for sending the mice dolls, making the Aira custom portrait doll. Those just really sparked this whole idea, and it turned out to be such a different creative experience than I thought it would. It was so fun, it was so exciting, but a little bit more difficult than I had initially imagined. If you've ever made a mouse house or are thinking about a mouse house, let me know what your plans are in the comments. I would love to hear. Make sure you have subscribed to my channel because next weekend, Halloween weekend, I am coming out with something very exciting, a much different video than this one. It's gonna be slightly, okay, it's gonna be scary. Well, the theme is scary movie. It's gonna be a diorama on a scary movie. So you're definitely going to want to be there to get in your Halloween thrills. And I never really talk about this, but if you want to make sure you know every time I put up a video, since my schedule's kind of been a little bit different, you can click the notification bell. It's right next to the subscribe button once you've pushed the subscribe button. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I will see you in the next one. This may be painful to watch. I did it! Okay, back to the pants. And that's all she wrote. Or videoed.